Hello patrons, so we are on to the second method for creating an accurate sketch. So in this video I'm going to be showing you how you can use a drawing grid to help you get an accurate sketch. So I'm going to be drawing this Coke can which we'll be using for the metal tutorial that we're doing, and so I'm just going to sketch it out using this method. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm using a ruler to create the grid, and I'm doing it in 2-inch squares. So I'm just measuring 2 inches along the top of the paper and just doing a vertical line. And you need to make sure that you do the exact same grid for your reference photo and your drawing paper so that you can follow it like exactly from the reference photo to the drawing paper. So if you want to do smaller squares, then you can do that. So if you want to do 1-inch squares, then you can do that, and that will give you a more accurate sketch. But bear in mind that you'll have lots of little squares, so it might get a bit more confusing. But it's up to you. Experiment and see which sort of size drawing grid is something that you find the most sort of useful. As you get more advanced with it, you can use larger and larger squares so you have much less reference points, because having lots of squares can make it a bit cluttered and it can also be difficult to erase. Make sure that when you do this you use really light pencil marks so that it doesn't stand out. So I am doing it really dark because I want it to show up on camera, but if you're doing it, make sure that you're barely applying any pressure to the pencil, because with the drawing grid the most important thing is that you need to be able to erase it without any trace of the drawing grid showing through. So I'm doing it very dark, but don't follow as dark as I'm doing it because I'm just doing this so that you can see it on camera. Otherwise, if I did it as light as I normally would, you guys wouldn't be able to see it very clearly. So try and use like a 5H pencil, or if you're using a HB pencil, just do it very lightly. So as you can see, I've gone across the top with 2-inch gaps. I started at the reference photo to the edge, and then I redid the exact same process for the drawing paper. And then I'm going to do the same thing horizontally across both sides. So I'm going to do it in one sort of pencil line going across both of the sides of the paper. So I'm just measuring the 2 inches horizontally now. So this isn't my favourite method that I like to do because I do find the actual grid quite distracting. I'd rather freehand it using just like the pencil for the measurements, but it is actually a really useful method because you have so many reference points that you can use. You can see where certain outlines kind of hit the grid and the individual squares so that you can stay accurate throughout the drawing process. Anyway, so the first method that we did was using a monitor to create the sketch, and now we're doing the drawing grid method, and then next time I'm going to be showing you how you can freehand it using just the pencil for guidelines. So this is kind of the middle sort of hardness level method. They do get more challenging as you go along, so if you haven't seen the method to use a monitor, then I recommend checking that one out. And if you find this too easy and you want to use a more challenging method, then definitely try out the three-handing method, using just the pencil as kind of a guideline tool to measure different angles and lengths. So once I've created that drawing grid, I'm just lightening up the actual drawing grid on the paper a little bit, so on the drawing paper, so that it's a bit lighter and it isn't so dark, so when I do my kind of sketch for the actual drawing, it will stand out more than the drawing grid will. But it's up to you whether you want to lighten it a bit or whether you want to keep it as dark as it is when you sketch it out. Anyway, so that's it for how to create the drawing grid, and now I'm going to show you how you can use that drawing grid to create a really accurate sketch. Okay everyone, so now that we have got the grid drawn out, we need to start kind of sketching out this Coke can. And so when you're using the grids, you can either work by doing the basic outlines and using these squares to kind of guide how you do your outlines, or you can do it by individual squares, so render each square at a time. It's up to you how you like to do it. I don't really use the grid method too much. I prefer to use other methods. I find that the grids get in the way and can be a bit confusing, and also it's sometimes hard to erase and you might still see traces of the grid behind if you're not careful and don't do it light enough. But a lot of people find this method really useful, so it's definitely worth giving a go. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to not do it square by square. I'm going to, for example, do this whole straight line, but use the squares to kind of guide the angles and use the negative space to see whether I'm doing the angles correct. So I'll do the basic outline and then fill in all of the details. So if you look at kind of this part, I'm just going to go over the angle for that. So this is the first line that we want to draw in. So we're going to start at the edge of this square. So if we follow along, it starts about here. And you're going to follow the individual angles. So for example, draw this first angle and then go and do that part, and then you can just do it to this square and then see how it goes over the next squares. So I'm going to start by just looking at this line for this square. So it starts off by going pretty much straight up. So I'm going to do that bit first. We can adjust things as we go, and it goes to just to the left of this corner. You can put your pencil down to help get to grips with the angle. You can also use an eraser to change things. You don't have to get it perfect straight away. It is okay to make little mistakes. Okay, then you can look at how it goes across this square. So it just kind of cuts across the corner. Just gonna carry that across. And now for this square, it hits about halfway between this square. So pretty much on the halfway mark. And it's just a straight line connecting them. Okay. So this helps give a series of reference points so that we are more likely to keep everything accurate and in proportion. So now I'm going to look at this part in two separate angles. So firstly, it's going straight up at a continuous sort of gradient, and then it changes direction. So it continues at this sort of direction until about again halfway up here. So halfway is where it kind of continues. And then it changes to that. Okay. So now this curves around partly into this next square. So I'm just going to curve that round a bit. And now we're going to try and do this curve. And this curve is a bit trickier because it's rather than being straight lines, it is a curve and it changes angles quite a bit. So I'm just going to look at where it hits this side of the square. So you can use your pencil to measure how far down the square it hits. Okay, so we know it hits the square about here, so we've got to take it up. I'm just going to curve it round to meet that reference point that we just drew. Okay, so if we follow this curve down here, I'm going to measure how far it hits this side. So just over the wood casing. We'll just undo it this side. So now if we follow this along with our pencil, we can see that it's slowly curving downwards and then it gets a bit steeper towards the end. So we're slowly curving downwards, then towards the end we get much steeper, just like that. Okay, and then we've got this other band which is quite parallel to it, so I'm just going to draw this band kind of following the curvature of the other line that we just drew. Okay, so now this line curves around a bit and goes a bit inwards. Okay, so now let's draw the outline for this line. So it's going to cut the edge of this square just a bit into it. So now I'm just going to attach this line. So we curve slightly downwards first and then it goes into just a straight line. So curve slightly downward first and then go into this straight line. And then carry it on just that same angle across the corner of this square. And then so the line carries on up until just a bit before this wood casing. So about here. You can neaten up these lines with a ruler later on if you want. And so we carry on this line until the wood casing length away from the bottom. And then so you might notice as you go on that some things are slightly off, and you can just go and change them. I would recommend using a much lighter pencil than I'm using. I'm using a HB pencil, but don't do it as dark as I'm doing it. I'm only doing it dark so that it shows up while on camera. Otherwise, I would normally be doing my sketches a lot lighter than this. So I'm just going to curve that round. Okay, so this outline here is a continuous curve and it hits about halfway on this box. Is it halfway? About here. So I'm just going to join these two areas up with a nice curve. Okay, so now we've got the outline shape of the can a bit better. Just going to adjust this. And now I'm going to go in and fill in the kind of interior structures. So firstly, I want to get in this main circular area here. So it starts at this point, it hits about halfway up this square. And it goes pretty much on the corner of this square and then joins up about here. So I'm just going to use those reference points to help me create this curve. I might bring this line up a bit. So you can look at it, how it changes direction. So it slowly is going up, then it goes a bit level, and then it starts to go down. So we're slightly going up, go a bit level, and then we're starting to go down. This is pretty much just a nice clean curve towards that corner. So just keep adjusting until you're happy with it. Maybe this line needs to go out a bit further. Yeah. And then I'm going to check whether this point needs to go out a bit further, which it does. So I'll just keep adjusting it. This bit can be quite tricky, so you guys might find this part really simple. So I'm really trying to concentrate on these angles now. Okay, so I'm going to leave that area for now and just try and get in some of these other rings. So I'm going to continue to just use these edges to help guide where my point should be going. So just take your time. So I'm also just going to create this little groove here. So drawing something like this can be quite difficult because it's very obvious if something looks off, which is good as well because you can easily see what you need to fix. But it can also make it quite difficult because even if something is slightly off, it will change the whole structure of the can. So now I'm just blocking in the shape of the barcode. So you want to try and be as accurate as possible. If things are like a tiny bit off, then that's okay. as long as it doesn't make it look anatomically weird. What's important is to get these curves in so it looks like the barcode is actually curving around the can. Otherwise, it probably won't look as realistic as it could look in the end because your structure will be off. Just going to block in this part. One thing that's also really important when you're drawing this Coke can is to make the font of the Coca-Cola part really accurate, because that is an important part and one of the focus points of this drawing, and people will be looking at that part. So it's important to try and get that font really accurate. Also, when you're drawing the writing like this and the numbers and letters, you've got to bear in mind that it is curving around the can as well. So you've got to bear in mind how that will impact the angle of the lettering and wording and the numbers. So I'm just roughly blocking this in first, and then once I'm happy with the marks that I've made, I can make them a bit more kind of crisp so that I'll hit the edge of this line a bit. I'm also going to draw in these main lines as well in a minute. So the grid method can be good if you're doing a realistic face and you want to make sure you're getting proportions right. So now I can see that this line meets the corner of this part, so I'm just going to curve that down. So it curves up and kind of out. like that. So I'm using the grid a bit for like the reference points, but I'm not using it, like I'm not constantly checking it. I'll use it for a few basic points, but then I'll just kind of connect them together. I'm also using like other parts of the drawing to help guide me. So for example, this line here, I know it carries on from this point pretty much. So I use both of them as a tool to help guide. So you've got this other box that's in line with the barcode, and it finishes just a bit before it. I'm keeping my lines parallel to this area. Curve it over. So this part ends just before the top of this line, and it's curving over and getting closer to that line. And then the line is just to the left of where this would be. So that's how I use other parts of the drawing to help get everything else in a bit more accurately. So then we'd have the writing about here, this writing. So now I'm drawing in this line. It cuts about halfway across this box. So marking on about halfway, and it continues to go pretty much through the corner of here and then curves around. And then you can look at the relationship between these two curves to see if it looks about accurate. Now I want to start to block in the writing. So I'm going to look at how close it is to this L, and it's quite close. It's about here. So like I said, with the writing, it's really important to be accurate because of the font. So I'm really going to try to perfect this and spend quite a bit of time on this part. So I might have to keep tweaking this until it's how I want it. So I need to make this a bit taller. Needs to be in line with, these all need to be in sort of line with each other. So I'm just going to draw on some guidelines that we can make the writing a bit more accurate. So you can see that the bottom of this C rests on this line. So I'm just going to get all of the letters blocked in, and then we can go in and perfect the lettering. So the A needs to be already here, so we've made, well, I've made the letters a bit too sort of wide. That's okay. Go and fix that. So the A needs to have already started about here. No, even further in actually. Okay, so I'm just going to raise all of this. It needs to be on a different angle. So the L needs to be cutting across at more of this sort of angle. And then you've got the O here. You can move the C. The C is a bit too... Well, I'm just going to do it all over again. I'm going to put the O there and the A. So that cuts up here. So the A is there. Okay, so now I'm going to do it again and hopefully it'll be a bit better. I don't really like doing lettering. It's not my favourite thing to do. I do find lettering quite tricky. So the C actually starts a bit further back, which is good because we wouldn't have been able to fit it in quite there. So we can start the C a bit further back. Okay, so I want to see how far this C starts from the edge. Okay, so it starts quite early on. Okay, so I'm happy with how this part's looking. We need to obviously now change this part because we haven't fitted in some of the things. So there really isn't any need to rush it. Even if it does take you this long, it doesn't really matter because this is the most important part. You need to have an accurate sketch. Okay, so now we've blocked in the lettering. I'm much happier with how it's looking now. Obviously it looks very messy at the moment because we've tweaked loads of bits and bobs here and there, so I'm gonna have to clean it up in a minute, but I just want to get everything blocked in first and then I'll clean up everything. So next to this, I'm just going to change this part. So I'm also going to now shade in where the shadow is going to be. So you've also got that shadow in, and now I want to work on the barcode. So I'm just going to get everything away with this brush, and now we're going to start working on the barcode. So we've got the 5 first. Try to get the size of the numbers accurate. Got 4, another 4, 9, 'I'm going to draw a line parallel to this barcode so we can see where the bottom of the numbers need to rest. So we got the third O finishes about there. Also look at the angle that the numbers are tilted at. So we've got 0, 0, 0, 9, 9, 6. And then so you're going to have the bars go in across. I'm not worrying too much about making these perfect, but I am looking at the direction that they should be going in. So I've got 2 thin ones before the 6, and then a little bit away from that we've got another 2 thin ones between the 6 and the 9. And then we've got a thick one between the 2 9s. And then a thin line, and then another thick line. Between the 9 and the 0. And then we have, so where are we between the, okay, so I've got another thin line. So I'm just marking in where they're going to go. So now we roughly know where the bars are and also what the letters are. I'm just going to go over the letters again. They need to all be in line. And I'm just filling in all of these little bits, so the individual letters and the kind of words on here. See, some of the words you can't read. They're too kind of blurry. So I'm just blocking in the parts I can see. Okay, so I'm nearly finished with the sketch. We've nearly got everything in its rightful place. And so we can just then go in and adjust and clean up the lines and make it a really neat sketch so that it's ready for colouring. So now I just need to put in this part here. So now I just need to put in this part here. Okay, so now that I've got all of the basics down for the sketch, all of the main outlines, I'm now going to go in and just clean up some of the lines and also just erase the guidelines because we don't need the grid now. So I'm going to first sharpen my pencil and then kind of make it look not so fuzzy, just clean up all the lines and then erase the grids, and then that's it for this method. So I'm going to start to erase the grid. I'm going to get my larger rubber actually. See, one thing I don't like about this method is you have to then try and go and erase all of the grid lines inside the actual drawing as well. But you don't want to get rid of any of your actual drawing. Okay, so now I'm going to use the kneaded eraser to help clean up this sketch. So firstly I want to clean up the main outline, so I'm lightening it up a bit, and then I'm going to go straight in with the HB pencil and just create more of a crisp line. So I'm slowly erasing each line, and then I'm just going back over it just to clean it up. Also, if your sketch does get too messy, then you can always do this on plain paper, just like printer paper, and then transfer it to your drawing paper once you're happy with your sketch. So I do that quite a lot. I might even do it with this one, especially if you find that your drawing grid doesn't completely erase. You can use this technique and just transfer it over to another piece of paper. So let's try and do this in one kind of crisp line. Lastly, I'm just going to clean up the lettering. So now we've just got to do this part. Okay guys, that's it for this sketch. As you can see, we now have an accurate sketch that we can go and colour in. So you can see how using that grid method helped to use it as reference points, and so that we could keep everything in proportion as we went through the sketch. So it's harder to go off task and a bit too far out, because you're limited to just making mistakes up to like 1 square. So I hope you enjoyed that method. The next method that we're going to do is freehanding, using just the pencil to actually help do the measurements, so you won't have the grid to also help guide you. So that will be the trickiest kind of method that I'll be showing you guys, and I will see you next time. Bye guys!